Okay, so in this video I'm going to cover how to make a rendering with the kind of cluster configuration that you've modeled based on your block, and kind of give you a lesson on how to make materials with more with bitmap textures and things like that. So the first step is to open up your file that you modeled your kind of cluster thing in. And I'm going to go, first of all, to my browser, go to kapla.arizona.edu, and search for the software guidebook. And that will be, if I go in here, student software, and click on the link. So in this PDF, if we go back to the beginning, go to contents, we can find the tutorial, PDF tutorial for Vray in Rhino that just walks you through all the basic steps of setting up a rendering. So I'm going to kind of follow along with these steps in this tutorial. So our first step is to go to render at the top and set our current renderer to Vray. And then you should see like a Vray menu pop up at the top. That means Vray is loaded. The next step is to set up your view. So again, you could change into perspective. In the perspective viewport, you can type in perspective angle. And the higher the number, the kind of wider the lens is, so the kind of more extreme your camera angle will look like. And then under named views, which you can also get to by just typing in named view, you go ahead and save that view angle. Okay, and then it's in there, so no matter what we do, we can get back to it. Okay, the next step is to kind of set up our rendering settings. So under the Vray menu, go to Asset Editor. In the little gear icon, you'll find some options for your engine. So you can set the quality to low. What I'm going to do for right now is I'm just going to click Interactive, and that should allow me to like do a rendering and kind of see any changes that I'm making live. So that's better for setting up the file. I'm also going to go to Render Output. First, I'm going to go under Aspect Ratio and choose Match Viewport. I can also turn on the safe frame, and that should, in your viewport, kind of show you like where your camera angle is. And then I could switch back to custom and kind of bump this up, the width and height, and I'm going to change it to about 2500, which is roughly how many pixels you would want for an 11 by 17 rendering at 150 dpi. Okay. Then I'm going to start to set up my environment. So in Vray, I can go to the menu, go to Lights, choose Sunlight. And in here, you can uncheck manual control. Just like with the Rhino sun, you can go down here, enter a location, Tucson, Arizona, and set a time of year, time of day. I don't really care too much right now, so I'm just going to leave it on manual control. Set it to some angle, that's fine, click OK. And then I'll place it, I'll click somewhere in the viewport to actually place my light. Now I want my light to be oriented, kind of looking towards and across the point of view of my saved view. So I could just rotate this object, this light object, or this light vector, sunlight vector, to kind of get it at the angle I want. Also, I should point out in Vray, under this little light bulb button, you can see all the lights in your scene, and you can turn them on and off by clicking that little icon. You want to make sure you always only have one sun, and anytime you want to update the sun, if you're using a specific location and sun angle, you just select on that vector and click Edit in Vray Asset Editor. Click Edit and then you can get back in here and change the sun angle. Okay, so we now have our sun set up. We're going to go under environment, which I believe is the next step. Yep. So go back to the gear, go to the environment tab. And first I'm going to make a different setup for my background. You can see because the little checkerboard is blue, that means I already have something loaded in there. I'm just going to right click and hit clear. Then I can click it again. And I want to choose this one, sky. And under sky, I'll choose sunlight. And so what this will do is it'll use the position and angle of my sun to like generate kind of a background that looks like, you know, the light is coming from the right place. And if I go lower to environmental overrides, I'm going to turn on the skylight, the reflection, and the refraction. So this one here shows the actual sky in my background, in my rendering. I'm just going to click and drag this blue checkerboard into all three of these. The skylight actually generates secondary lighting or atmospheric lighting. So that's the light source that will light stuff up that's not being shown in direct sunlight. And then reflection and refraction are going to show us like, you know, when our material has a reflective property, like a metal, like something like metal would have, it's going to reflect the sky. So it's going to show us kind of the color and light sources that are happening in the sky as a result of the sun. And the refraction will do the same for transparent or translucent material. So that's just to kind of make the whole scene look cohesive. Okay, so now I'm done setting up the environment. My next step would be to make a ground plane if I wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and skip that for right now. And then this is what I want to focus on in this tutorial the most, which is how to make materials. So under the asset editor, go to this very first circle checkerboard icon, and then under the material list tab, we're actually going to use a set of bitmaps or like JPEG files, image files, to make our own materials. So if you go to our D2L course site, go to the workshop, and go to the CNC Hotwire, there's this little zip file called called rendering materials that you can download, and that will have a whole series of different images in it that show different textures. So I'm going to give you a quick tutorial on how to use those textures to actually make a rendering material. Okay. So in the material editor, under material list at the bottom, you'll see this little plus with a circle. I'm going to click on that to create a new material. And I'm just going to choose generic. Now, you can see by default it's just a regular gray material with no real properties. If I click on this little, if I click on this little arrow to the right, I can expand and look at all the options I have for setting up this material. So first of all, I have a channel called diffuse, and you can see that that just sets the color of the object. So that'll be where we'll set up like you know, basically what the texture of the object is of the material. So in this little channel, I'm going to click on the little checkerboard, set it to a map. I'm going to choose bitmap, which just means like image file. And then I'll go in my render materials folder. And to start with, maybe I'll just choose rammed earth. Go ahead and click open. Should see it previewed there in that little window. And then when I go back, so click back at the bottom, you should see your material preview looks, will be showing the actual texture. Now the next few options in here are also pretty useful. So reflection is another one we're going to use. Now reflection and refraction work pretty much the same as like a transparency map. So what that means is that the reflection color, the lighter it is, the more reflective your object will be. So looking in the viewport, you can kind of see what I mean. The darker it is, the less reflection there will be. And then the other thing to pay attention to is the glossiness. So this option will allow us to make those reflections. You see how we have a pretty sharp reflection kind of going on the surface there? If I turn this down, you can start to see that our reflections will get more dull. So that's kind of how we get it to have different reflective properties. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to set a map to my reflection and glossiness channel. Oh, also I should point out, if you want an object for whatever reason to be really, really reflective, you go down here to reflection IOR, which stands for index of refraction. Turn that guy on and turn it up. And so like if you were modeling, trying to make a material that looked like chrome or something like that, or like a really high polished material, you could turn that slider up and get it to look really reflective. By default, it's 1.6, which is a pretty good number to leave it on for most objects. So I want to make a reflection glossiness map, bitmap, based on the texture that I have, which is this rammed earth texture. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into Photoshop, and I'm going to bring that texture into Photoshop so that I can edit it. So I'm going to just drag this guy into Photoshop to open it. Okay, so now we just have our texture. All I really want to do is apply a few different kind of appearance editors, or a few different layer appearance editors. So I'm going to go at the bottom to this little circle with the black and white. First thing I want to do is change it to black and white. So just like we were doing in with this slider between black and white, reflection glossiness will actually use like the black and white values of an image file to choose where to make the texture appear more reflective and less reflective. So the first thing we want to do is make it black and white. And then we could actually go in here and put another layer on top. And I'm going to choose exposure. And I'm going to bring out a little bit of contrast here. But I also just kind of want to lighten the image overall. Because that's going to help us kind of get more reflectivity out of the texture. And then when I'm kind of satisfied with what that looks like, I'll go to File, Save As, and save it as a JPEG. And I'll rename it Reflection Map. Okay. So now, in my Vray window, I'm going to click on the checkerboard, select Bitmap, and set it to that new image that I just saved. Okay. And now you can see somewhat that it's starting to give us a like more of a patchy reflection based on like what the texture of that material would look like. That's going to make it look, you know, more realistic. Okay. The other thing that I want to set up in here right now is because rammed earth has, you know, kind of a rougher surface texture to it, I can actually, in Vray, set up something called a bump map. So if I go down here to where it says Maps, go to Bump Normal Mapping, I can click this little slider to turn it on. And in here I can also set up, I can use an image file to create a bump map. Now a bump map works the same way. It uses grayscale color values to define like whether the surface appears to be protruding out or like receding back. So I also want to save another version of this texture in order to create that bump map. Now I'm also going to turn off that exposure layer here, and I'm going to make a new adjustment called levels So levels will also let me like bring out more contrast if I slide these two bars. And I can kind of lose, some of the extremes if I need to. And I'm going to go for something a little bit darker with this one. So the more contrast, the better, right? That means there's going to be more difference between the highs and the lows in the actual three-dimensional texture when it renders. And once I'm happy with that, I'll go File, Save As, JPEG, and I'll rename it to Bump Map. Okay. And so now I go back to Vray, open my checkerboard, click on Bitmap, and select that file I just saved. Now I'll go back, and you can see immediately our material looks a lot different. The first thing I want to point out is so this is a slider that kind of sets like how much the surface appears kind of three-dimensional, how much kind of texture it has. And 1 is way too high. So what I want to do is select this number and type in like 0.04 and press enter. And now you can see our reflections have returned, and we can almost really not see the texture map, but that's okay. It'll show up when we render. So set it to 0.04. And the last thing I want to do is rename this material. I'll just double click on it and name it Rammed Earth. Okay. And now I would go to my layers panel. Whatever layer my blocks are on, I want to set the material to that layer. So just choose the material button in the layers panel. At the top, I'm going to click the drop down and click Use Plugin. Go to Browse and choose the one, the material I just created. Now, another thing that I want to do in between here, and I believe it also talks about this in the PDF, is how to set up the mapping, right? So even though if I change into rendered view, even though we've created a material and applied it to our object, it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be mapped at the correct size. So if you have different size objects, the texture might appear smaller and larger, or the orientation might be wrong or something like that. So what we can do, well, first of all, if your kind of rendered view looks really dark like this, in order to fix that, you would go to Display, Edit Rendered Settings. You could also get there by just typing Options in the command line, going down to View Rendered. And in here we have a choice under our lighting scheme. We have a choice to choose scene lighting or default lighting. So the scene lighting means it's going to use our lights in the scene to actually light the, show us what's going on, what it looks like. Because we're using a V-Ray sun, Rhino gets kind of confused. So we're just going to reset it to default lighting right now. And now we can see our textures a lot better. And so now if I wanted to adjust the mapping of this texture, I could select all my objects, go to Properties, and this little cylinder texture mapping button in Properties is how we can actually modify our properties, or I'm sorry, our mapping. So the first thing I could do is I could change the repetition of the texture on my material. So you can see right away that by default it's just mapping it to each material or each object individually. So it's using the kind of orientation of the surfaces that make up the geometry to just apply a material. Now if I were to go down here and go to UVW repeat and enter 2, you can see it's now showing like basically two like tiles of this image, of this texture on every object. So it's made our material, our texture smaller. I can also go the other direction. I can make it 0.5, and that has made our material appear bigger. Now, if I don't like the orientation, what I need to do is apply a different kind of mapping. So like I said, by default, it'll just map to the surfaces based on how you model it. And up here at the top of this little texture properties menu, we have a whole bunch of options. So most of the time you'll probably want to use one of the ones in here, surface, which is what you would use for like you know, something curvilinear, planar mapping, which is obviously something flat, box mapping, which is like something rectilinear, or maybe spherical, or probably cylindrical if you had something like a column, a circular column. So I'm going to choose box mapping just to illustrate how this works. And if I zoom out a little bit, you can see it's going to ask me where I want to place it, which is also important. That's how it will determine where to start the kind of tiling of the texture. Now I can enter dimensions in there if I wanted to, or I can just click. So basically I've drawn a box that's going to define, like, there will be one texture in this direction, one texture in that direction, and one in that direction. It'll ask if I want it capped. The answer is yes, so I'll just press enter. Okay, now you can see that our texture is kind of a uniform orientation across the whole object. So the texture is just kind of going up in layers. It has one orientation. If we were to go and select all these objects, now we can move. Like I said, where I drew that box matters because that's where the textures will start to appear. I can move that. So if I want to move the textures kind of across the object, I can change the XYZ position of the texture. If I want to move, if I want to rotate it, I can do that here. And if I want to change the size, so as you can see, I drew kind of an irregular sized box. I can change that to something more standard. Okay. So now I have my texture applied and sized. So I'm ready to do a test rendering. I go back to the Rhino asset editor, or the Vray asset editor, and click on the little teapot. I'm just going to minimize that for right now. Okay, so this is roughly what you should see. First of all, if it looks too bright or too dark, what you want to do is in the asset editor, go to the gear icon, go to camera, and move this slider where it says exposure value. So I think the default is actually 10, so it probably looks too bright for you. So move that number to a bigger number until it's kind of balanced. Okay. And now if I orbit around in my viewport, you can also see, like, I'm looking at it from different angles, depending on what my viewport is set to. There's my rendered view. And if I zoom in really close, so I'm going to zoom in on like one of these blocks, I can kind of get a closer up preview of what my material is looking like. And under the asset editor, I could go back to my material and make changes and kind of see what that effect is. So if I go to reflection and turn down the reflectiveness, you can see the effect that has. There's less kind of white highlights. You can also kind of see the texture starting to appear, where we have faces that are really you know, close to the angle that the light is hitting it. So you can see the kind of three-dimensionality. We could turn that up as well if we wanted to see it more. So under bump map, I could turn that slider up a little bit. I'm going to turn my reflection back up. And then, like I said, I could turn the index of refraction up and make it look really, really bright. Okay. So yeah, the bump mapping will also affect kind of how the material reflects, right? Because bump mapping kind of simulates like the three-dimensionality, like it actually gives the surface a three-dimensional kind of texture. It will also affect, you know, like how much light is hitting it, depending on the angle. Okay. So once you're pretty much happy with the way the object is looking and the way the material is looking, and the angle, then you would choose stop up here, or you could choose stop up here where the teapot is. And you could turn off under the settings, you could turn off interactive. You could turn the quality up to high. And then you could run a final render, which I won't wait for right now, but if you were to wait for it to finish, you would get a really nice polished image. Now I want to quickly show you guys a couple of other material setups, just so you get a sense of how to do this. The next one I'm going to show you is glass. So I think we may have done this last year, I can't remember. But just to also, you know, illustrate, if I make a new material, go to reflection, turn it all the way up, you can see my object becomes reflective. If I go to refraction, turn the refraction color all the way up, my object becomes translucent. Now, a couple of things in here. Refraction works exactly the same as reflection. So the more this, the higher this number is, the more transparent or translucent, or I'm sorry, the lighter this color is from black to white, the more transparent or translucent the material is. And under IOR, the higher this number is, the more the kind of refraction of the object is going to change. So the kind of thicker it'll look. So once again, you want to leave that on 1.6, especially for glass, because it can really distort what things look like when you're looking like through a window or something. But the other thing I want to point out is the glossiness of the refraction, which if we turn that down, you can see we're starting to get like a more like a frosted glass effect. So if I were to go in here and apply this glass material and hit render, you can see what we're kind of getting is like kind of like an ice cube. Oops, I'm sorry. Let me change it back to interactive. So it's going to reflect the environment. It's going to reflect the color of the sky, depending on which angle we're looking at it. If I were to turn the refraction glossiness back up to 1, now it's going to look really, really clear and sharp, like a crystal. And I could turn the reflection down and start to make, you know, more highlights come out of my object. I can make it look kind of more highlighted. And then, like I said, if I were to change the IOR, so right here you can kind of roughly see that we're looking through, you know, like more or less like a prism. If I turn the IOR way up on the refraction, you can see it'll start to distort what's happening, or what's being refracted through the crystal. Okay. And then I want to show you one more example. So I'm going to stop this, make another material, and this time I'm going to do a block. So most of what I'm going to do is the same. I'll make a new material, call this my block wall. I'll choose the map and go to Bitmap, choose block wall. So this is one of the textures that was included in that package. Again, your assignment doesn't call for any specific one, just that you kind of play with and try a bunch of different ones. So you can choose whichever one you want. So I can apply that block texture as the texture of my object. If I go to Reflection, I'll turn Reflection on. And under Reflection, Glossiness, again, I'm going to choose my bitmap. So because it's already kind of black and white, I'll just use this one because it's quicker. Okay, and then finally, what I want to point out here is if we go down to bump map, we can actually make a map. So I'm going to go back to Photoshop and bring my block wall texture into Photoshop. Okay, and what I'm going to show you now is how to actually make a map so that we can get the kind of three-dimensionality you would see in like a block wall like this. And what I mean by that is, like, you know, there would be these seams where the grout is would be kind of receded from the face of the block. So I'm going to kind of show you how to model, or I'm sorry, how to make the texture for that. So first I'm going to make a new layer. I'll just click on the little page thing and then in the layers panel. And I'm basically just going to draw. What I want to do is make a black and white texture. And I'm going to trace the grid lines of this block wall, which may sound arduous, but it'll be quick. So I'm going to go on to, well, first of all, I'm going to make a set of black lines that represent the vertical grid, then I'll make a new layer for the next. So I'm going to go to the brush tool. Again, I can hold Alt and right click on the keyboard to change the size. If I go right left, I can make it bigger or smaller. Up down, I can change the hardness. I can zoom in a little bit here, kind of get it pretty small because I want to match the size of that seam. And if I click up here, hold Shift on the keyboard and drag my mouse down, as long as I'm holding Shift, it'll draw a straight line. Okay. Now what I want to do is, instead of, I could go through and draw, you know, whatever, like 15 straight lines, or I could just use this one and copy it. So I'm going to go back to the selection tool at the top. I'm going to click on my layer while holding Control on the keyboard. And what that will do is it'll select all the stuff that's like on my layer currently. So it automatically selected that line that I just drew. And now all I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it. So I'm going to hold Alt on the keyboard. You'll see your cursor change to a double arrow. And I'm going to start moving it. You can see I want to hold Shift as well, because as I move it, I want to make sure I'm not like moving the end. I just want to move it straight left to the next seam. Now I would go back to my layer, hold Control, click on it. This time I'll drag 2 lines. And repeat the same steps. And because it's regularly spaced, or should be regularly spaced, I can get through all my lines pretty quickly. And I'm not sure if there's one at this end. I just want to make sure. Okay. So there's all the lines I need in one direction. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other direction. I'll make a new layer. Again, that'll make it easier to edit these things. So I'll make a new layer, go to Paintbrush. Again, I'm just going to click at the start of one of my seams, hold Shift, and drag my mouse all the way across. Hit Control and click on the layer, change back to the selection tool, hold Alt, start to drag it, hold Shift, and then release it when it's in the right spot. Should be really, really quick. So right there we have kind of a weird spacing. So if you wanted to select just one line and move it, so first I would hit Control D to deselect. In order to select like one line, I'll just go to the selection tool, or the little rectangle tool. Now it looks like this line's maybe a little bit off. Or I'm sorry, this line's a little bit off. So I can click and drag around that whole line. And then when I hit Control on the keyboard, a little scissor thing will show up. And it'll just move anything that's within that boundary, which is exactly what we want. And that's the reason that you would keep the horizontal and vertical lines separate. So again, if I wanted to select a smaller kind of set of lines, oops. Okay, so those ones got kind of weird as well. Just drag them down. Okay. And then I'll do just the last couple here. Oops. Okay, looks pretty good. Now the other thing with textures like this is you want to make sure that you start and end on either a seam or in the middle of a block. Now it's looking like at the top, so if I turn my black lines off, there's no seam up there, right? Which means that we kind of want there to be a seam at the bottom. The other thing I could do is move this edge down just a little bit so that it's closer to the seam of the wall. And it looks like on the left-hand side, I have a line, and on the right-hand side, I don't. So I'm in good shape on those two ends. And that will just allow us to make the texture look seamless when we tile it in the material. Okay, last thing I want to do here, and you could leave the gray behind if you wanted to. Again, because the gray is lighter than the black, it will still, it will still pop out more than the black lines will. So it'll still create the illusion of kind of a three-dimensional brick wall. If you wanted even more contrast, or if you wanted it to look even more regular, you would just make another layer and go to the paint bucket tool, set your paint bucket to white, and then place that layer at the bottom, so that you just have just a black and white texture. So just kind of two really simple levels. Then I would save this image as, make it a JPEG. I'm going to rename it as my bump map. Okay. Click OK. And then back in Vray, under bump, normal mapping, turn that guy on, click on the checkerboard, bitmap, and choose that new texture I just saved. And now when I go back, you can kind of start to see it looks pretty three-dimensional. I'm gonna still turn my bump level way down. Okay, and I'll set my blocks to that new material I just made. Okay, and you can see right away how it's being mapped to the surface. And if I were to go ahead and render this now, we should see that there will be, you know, a clear distinction in height between the kind of seam and the brick face, or the block face. It's kind of giving us that illusion of like a three-dimensional brick wall. And of course we can bump it up or down. In Photoshop, if we wanted to change, you know, like how thick the black lines are, I could select all these layers and copy them. So duplicate, merge them, and then using the paint bucket tool, I could just fill in the white and start to make those lines thinner or lighter. If I wanted to do the opposite, if I wanted to make the black lines darker or thicker, then I would select just those black lines, duplicate, and I could move them over 1 pixel, right? So I could start to add thickness that way. And there we go. It looks like a pretty clean kind of block texture. It's actually maybe a little bit too strong. So we could just turn the effect down a little bit in here. Oops. And it also looks to me like the thickness of the line is a little too big. So once again, you could make a copy of, you know, all 3 layers, merge them, and the other thing you could do is, if you're not getting enough kind of information, you could increase the resolution. That way, when we go to like make these lines thinner, we have more pixels to play with. So now that I've made those thinner, I could save it again. Sometimes it can be hard to tell whether your changes have been updated. You can just go ahead and click on the map. Oops, what happened? And just reload that texture. And then you should see it restart. Okay, so now we have slightly thinner joints. All right, and that should conclude this tutorial.